City of Stevens Point Age-Friendly Commission meeting, recorded March 25, 2025.
Call this meeting to order at 5:03 p.m. Roll call.
Giblin.
Here.
Wigginton.
Here.
Agonut.
Here.
Douglas.
Yes.
Jury.
Here.
Livernash.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Wall.
Here.
And Zarazua.
Here.
I know.
Okay, discussion and possible action on the following. 2, report of the December 10th, 2024 meeting of the Age-Friendly Commission. Does anybody have anything?
We'll need a motion.
Yes.
Motion in a second.
Accepting the minute, I need a motion to accept the minutes. Report.
That was
Miller.
oh, okay.
I'll second.
Thank you, Don. Moving on to the discussion of the draft.
We'll need a vote.
Oh, crackers. Okay,
I come here just for that.
all those in favor of accepting the report?
Aye.
Aye.
All those ones.
All those opposed? All right, motion carries. Moving on to discussion on draft housing recommendations for the Stevens Point Aging Plan.
All right. So last time that we met, we kind of put a fine tune or a bow in the conversation of the data collection that will help facilitate the construction of this aging plan. And specifically, we talked about what different domains or sub-areas do we want to prioritize as part of the aging plan. So I have those 6 of them included on, this would be page 5 of the packet: housing, transportation, outdoor spaces and buildings, health services, civic participation and employment, and then the last one being communication and social participation. That last one kind of couples the 3 kind of quasi-independent but also connected to each other: the social participation, the information and communication, and the third one I'm blanking on at the moment. So really what this exercise will be today, and then for the subsequent meetings, will be having an initial review of proposed policy recommendations for each of these 6 items, and then really work as long as we need to fine-tune them, add more, delete some. So before I get into the details of each of these recommendations, I wanted to kind of take a step back and talk about what was my thought process in putting these policy recommendations together. There's a number of them. I think the easy ones, the big ones that stand out is 1, obviously using the survey data and more of the interpersonal communication that has existed over the last few weeks, months, and years. That really honed in, especially for these first 2, housing and transportation. We've heard a lot of comments over the months and years about what folks want the city to prioritize. So that was one factor. And then second factor, focusing more on the implementation of this plan. What I really try to do with these recommendations is to make sure that they're measurable and attainable. So measurable meaning, is there a specific data point that we can look at in the years ahead to say, yes, we're meeting this goal, or no, we got a long ways to go. And then also, is it attainable, right? It's that, it's finding that balance between shooting for the stars but being realistic in what you're actually setting out in this plan, right? And I guess the last thing I'll say too, just in terms of, to put a bow on this, is I purposely put a mix of both short, easy to fulfill, easy to implement goals, and also long, hard, more arduous policy recommendations. The reason that is obviously, this is a whole new endeavor, the creation of this commission. It's a whole new conversation that we as a city government are having with respect to aging, and I think it would do this commission and the implementation of this plan some justice if we have some easy wins to start. So I have some easy recommendations that has been fulfilled. So I guess how I'm going to go about this for this first one for housing and transportation is I'm going to go through each of the policy recommendations. I'm going to break them out into each of the 3 sections and then stop at each section for discussion. I'm going to expand a little bit on a summary of each of these as necessary. So just starting out with the first one for housing. So for here, I broke it into three general areas. First one being advocacy and collaboration. The second being more regulatory reform. So you see a lot of this is more zoning with a mix of subdivision ordinance as well. And then the last one being education and outreach. So for the first one, for the advocacy and collaboration, first recommendation is to partner with local and regional advocacy groups to prioritize accessibility requirements for new housing units. This is the one recommendation where I tried to focus more on the advocacy realm, meaning that there's a number of accessibility requirements that we as a municipality have no say-so whatsoever. It's mandated by the state. And so in order to see meaningful reform on the state level, there needs to be a call of action. There needs to be partnerships with local organizations to show the value and importance of such a change. So that's the first one. Second one being to collaborate with community-based organizations to assess the accessibility of the city's housing stock. Examples include, but are not limited to, the availability of handrails and grab bars, lighting, maintenance of internal sidewalks, and the location of accessible parking areas. So this is essentially meant to try to establish a baseline of where are we at generally at this very moment as it relates to the accessibility of our buildings, both residential and commercial. Obviously, it's not realistic to say we're going to do an audit of every single structure here. There's going to have to be some give and take, but this policy is more so meant to, this is a good example of the long-range policy recommendation, but one that really should be started early on, because this assessment is going to help really help with fulfilling a lot of these subsequent policy recommendations. So that's the second one. Third one is to partner with landlords, community-based residential facilities, and faith-based organizations. There could be more. I just named those three as big ones to stand out. So these three organizations, or these three groups, to identify the needs of underserved community members and improve awareness of housing resources. And then the last one being, and I've seen a couple of communities here in the state who have recently done this, and I thought this was pretty intriguing, is to host events with community organizations and departments. So some of the examples that other communities have utilized were their police departments, fire departments, ADRCs, to identify and eliminate accessibility risks in their home. So really, you know, how this would shake out is, hey, a police officer, a firefighter would come into a business in town and kind of do an audit or do a review of that structure to see, is there any sort of risks that that building poses. And this is focusing a little bit more, it's a little bit more targeted towards the hazard planning that I know we touched on at a previous meeting, but we haven't really touched on too in great detail. But this would kind of address, in a way, more of the hazard mitigation planning as well, making sure that if, God forbid, there's a fire or some sort of event that warrants police action, that we can try to be more proactive and make sure that those resources or any improvements to those structures are done ahead of time. So I'm going to stop right here. Any clarifying questions or comments that folks on the commission have?
What does it look like to collaborate to do a survey of our accessible housing stock?
Yeah, so it would be all volunteer-based, of course, since there's no legal authority for the city to go into anybody's house unless you get an inspection warrant, and short answer is that's not going to happen.
Hostile.
That's not going to happen. So obviously this would be volunteer-driven. There would have to be some sort of marketing and outreach component to show, hey, this is a new program being offered here in the city. We're encouraging residents to participate in this program, and if you're willing, we'll schedule a time with a police officer, firefighter, certain staff persons from some of our not-for-profit organizations to do an audit of that building. You know, I'm thinking specifically residential. We'll want to have a healthy mix of the different types of housing that we have. You know, both one-story and two-story, the different types, the different size of properties, since an audit would not necessarily focus just on the building itself, but also the property as a whole. How's the condition of the driveway? What's the means of egress going in and out of a house? So, like I mentioned, we can't obviously take a look at every single building here. I think as long as you have a healthy mix of the different types of housing in our community and encapsulate that as part of an audit, we should have some good.
Yeah, the reason I ask that is because there's a program in the Fox Valley, it's called Mugs for Rugs, and the police department collaborates with coffee shops, and people can turn in like their rugs they fall on, but it's like a way to encourage people to participate, and it's kind of funny, and so if there's some, like, I can see that working really well. Mugs for Rugs is really popular. People like bring in their braided rugs that are all trippy and get coffee cups, but I could see something like that, something kind of cute. And I know that Triad, which is an organization of police officers and aging units in the county, might be interested in partnering on that.
Any other comments or questions? Okay. Then next section will be kind of the fun stuff, the regulatory reform. Before going into these in detail, obviously I'm going to touch on this a little bit later on in the agenda with the zoning code rewrite, but the intention behind why I'd like to include some potential zoning code amendments is that will help guide the process for an overall zoning code rewrite when the time comes, 2026, 2027, right? If there's some questions, if it's from elected officials or certain citizens or stakeholders as to, hey, why is the city recommending this as part of their new zoning code, we can point to and say, hey, we as the Age-Friendly Commission, we talked about this, we recognize the merits and how that could be tied to the overall concept of aging in place. So to dive right into these policy recommendations focusing on regulatory reform, the first one is, so when providing tax incremental financing incentives, so development incentives for multifamily housing development, require a certain percentage of housing units to meet ADA standards for accessible design. And this is something that, we as a city have been fortunate to have a lot of multifamily development, especially over the last 5 years. There's ample examples that we can think of throughout the city. And one of the things that struck me doing when the time came to do occupancy inspections for those buildings, so granting people to start moving in, is typically there are only 2 ADA compliant units per floor in a apartment complex of 80 to 90 units, 80 to 90 plus units. Yes, if it's geared towards senior housing, it's in a way a different story. I'd hope that there would be a greater focus on that, just given the type of clientele that you're targeting as part of occupying these units. But I think that's a clear, and this is a clear policy recommendation of, if the city wants to put our money where our mouth is and prioritize this, this is really the first mark. If we're going to be providing city funds, which are limited and should be carefully considered, that we better make sure that there's an overall public benefit. And I think we all know the need for accessible housing units here in the city, not only now, but that need likely to increase in the next few decades, that if we could try to be more proactive with that, and again, put our money where our mouth is, that would be ideal. So that's the first one. Second one is, again, focusing more on zoning code changes, and these are meant to, really, these are meant more for new construction. For these, I tried to find the balance of housing recommendations for both new construction, adaptive reuse of existing buildings, additions, kind of address the different types of housing units that can be created. So first one is to reduce minimum size requirements for primary structures from 900 to 700. 700 is a more arbitrary number. So in most of our residential zoning districts, except for one, we require the house to at least be 900 square feet in size. If we talk about the affordability of creating new housing units, especially in the year 2025, a 900 square foot house would be uber expensive to construct. And so the thought is at least to reduce the minimum size requirement. If folks want to build a smaller house to make it more affordable for their needs, that at least the city's not providing any roadblocks for that. So that's first one for zoning code changes. Second one would be to amend land use standards starting in the R3 district. So how our zoning districts are classified. So for our residential zoning districts, we have 6 in total. So our R3, R4, R5, and our commercial industrial districts would be addressed as part of this recommendation. What this is saying is that if anybody wants to build a duplex, fourplex, cottage court, townhouse, really focusing more on that missing middle type of housing units, that type of construction should be permitted by right, meaning you don't need to go to a plan commission and a council for approval. That only requires staff sign off. And how it works right now is duplexes, some of the districts are permitted by right, some are not. For your triplexes, fourplexes, and up, all of it requires a conditional use permit. So reducing some of the red tape to make it more encouraging for folks to actually build that type of housing stock, which is definitely of interest for folks. I think reducing the red tape would be ideal. Third one, reduce minimum lot size requirements for condominium and multifamily residential uses. So this is really getting at density requirements. So how many housing units can you have on one property? And I'm not going to get into the details. This is a lot of math, and it's too late in the day for math, if I'm going to be honest. But basically, how our density restrictions are calculated for multifamily living is it's based off of how much, if you have housing units on the first floor, on the second floor, and third floor and up. It's based on if you have a patio or if you don't have a patio. It's based on how many bedrooms you have. It gets uber complicated. And that's not even to address the fact of some multifamily development where you might have commercial on the first floor and residential up top. That has a whole nother layer to it. So the goal of this is to make it a little bit more user-friendly and also reduce the lot size requirements, because for multifamily housing, it's intended to be only within certain areas of the city, targeted areas of the city, and when done right, there should be a little bit more flexibility in how much, what our density restrictions are for those types of land uses. And then the last one is to rewrite the city's accessory dwelling unit ordinance to spur greater construction and use of ADUs within city limits. So this was an effort that the city did back in 2021, 2022, and I won't get into the details, but needless to say, there's a reason why there has not been an ADU that's been constructed since. And that really is because our current ordinance is kind of a hodgepodge of a lot of different things. It's very complicated. Mihira, you, I'm sure, can attest to. There's a lot of layers to that. There's a lot of density to that, so much so that it's frankly all but impossible for most properties here in the town to even construct one because of minimum lot size requirements, because of requiring separate utility connections, because of adding certain height standards or occupancy standards. So, this is an area that ARP Wisconsin has been focusing on pretty extensively over the last few years. So, this is going to be an area where I'm sure, if there's an interest from this commission in including this as a policy recommendation, that they would be a great stakeholder to try to articulate the why and the importance of allowing that type of housing, allowing that type of housing development. And then the last one is for regulatory reform, is to adopt a provision in our zoning and subdivision ordinance to include a procedure for property owners to apply for an accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. What this is basically saying is, hey, if you're requesting to plat out a new subdivision as part of our subdivision ordinance, or construct a new house as part of our zoning ordinance, and you need reasonable accommodations as outlined under the ADA, there should be some exceptions that I, as zoning administrator, can grant because of such a situation. Because right now, there really isn't anything, and if somebody would want to get an exception, they would have to go before our zoning board of appeals, and they're limited in their ability to consent to certain variance requests because they have to base their decision on state guidelines. So this is really meant to add some flexibility if if a certain type of housing development or subdivision development comes in and the applicant is requesting for certain accommodations under the ADA, that the city should at least entertain that, and entertain that through internal matters instead of asking for a variance. So stop right there. Any thoughts, questions, concerns? Makira.
Question on, was it the first one? Requiring a certain percentage of housing units to meet the ADA standards. Are we able to do that? I just know when I was on council and talking about, like, can we require some low income within an apartment building that because of the exclusionary zoning things that from the state, that we weren't able to do that. So I just wondered if that fits within that.
Yeah, so this would be different than that. I mean, this is talking, there you're running into some protected class issues where what you're trying to target and not target. For here, this would be akin to if a council would want to adopt or include a condition on a conditional use permit saying, hey, you're required by code to have 4 accessible parking stalls. We want you to add 6 because of the type of housing, because of the type of occupancy requested as part of this housing development. So that is something that the council could, even right now, include as part of the condition, but.
It's a physical thing and not the people.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct.
Okay. And then just as far as the ADUs, I just want to comment that on council, I think what we were doing and obviously I can't speak for everyone else that was on council at that time, but trying to put something in place so that ADUs were allowable. There was so much pushback from the community and so much fear of oh, there's going to be all these extra buildings everywhere and, in my backyard and that kind of thing. So I think part of it was trying to get something in place so that people would see that everyone wasn't going to run out and build an ADU in their yard or convert all of their garages. But it is so restrictive. The only person I know that was planning on doing one, she said it was $50,000 for her to, running the electricity for it to be separate and water and all. It was just, it's so much that, it's just, when people really are talking about this, in this case, this person wants, their family member, their aging family member to be able to live there, and they're like, we can't afford that. Right. So the concern was that people would build ADUs and use it as a big money maker. And that's, I think, the reasoning behind having separate utilities. But in reality, the people that want it for a family member they don't have a lot of money necessarily to throw into that. Right. And so the whole purpose of having it can't happen. Yeah. So I do hope that that's something the city would readdress, because that was the intent at that time of passing it the way it was to try to at least get something allowable to open up for future possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Any other
with the first one, so certain percentage of housing units meeting ADA standards, how are you going about setting what that percentages? Is there like a best practice to lean on, or?
Unfortunately not. I purposely kept this vague. This is one of the kind of push the tough decision-making down the road when the time comes. Yeah, unfortunately, there's not a lot of examples here
Okay.
here in the state and country who have done this, so.
I think it's a great addition. Like, it seems like an easy thing to just
Yep.
do, but just figuring out what that number is.
Nationwide, the amount of accessible housing, and I don't know if maybe Don, you can back me up on this or if I'm wrong, but I think I read it's 1% of our housing is accessible. And so that's not going to cut
That
it.
number's been dropping.
It might be less than 1%. So maybe we'll be real greedy and ask for 3. I don't know, but it's not good.
Any other thoughts? All right. Then the last one for education. I kept this section a little bit shorter. Again, I could add a lot of policy recommendations, but I want to keep it short and concise. And also, education is going to be a common theme for a lot of these subsequent planning areas, quote unquote, transportation, outdoor spaces, et cetera. So first one is to create and publicize a comprehensive list of resources related to housing issues that residents experience. I think we all know areas that we can look to for certain types of resources. However, it's scattered beyond belief. And so, again, this is a good example of if the city wants to prioritize the messaging and having a one-stop shop, so to speak, in terms of information about housing, that it wouldn't be that difficult to create a web page, a web page on the city's website and put all those resources on one page. You know, I think this is a good example of a short, easy win. And then the last one being, this is one that's going to focus on, is going to be tied to housing and transportation as well, and that's to increase educational programming to encourage the clearance of snow within curb cuts. You know, folks are mandated to clear the snow off the sidewalk, not the curb cut, and especially the snowstorm that we had on Sunday.
Oh my gosh.
There's a lot of issues. And so, you know, we are not, the state cannot, per the state, we cannot force somebody to clear the curb cut of snow. So the next best thing is more outreach and trying to encourage folks to do so. You know, we've done some efforts to that in the past, but clearly there's a lot more work that can be done.
The Portage County Disability Coalition is working on this as well, so I can loop them in.
Okay.
But they've created like a 2-page thing for businesses. Carolyn at Milk has been very instrumental in this, but we created like a 2-page document on, you know, why you might want to clear your snow for people with disabilities. And I know that we're circling back to it, so.
Yep.
I think we need to extend the education beyond the Stevens Point Facebook page. So
Yeah. Yeah, that was fierce.
let Carolyn do some TikToks.
I like that. She's a rock star.
She is.
Awesome. So I guess I'll take a step back. Is there anything that you think is missing as part of the housing recommendations, or is there any recommendations listed on here that you think, hold up, Adam, like, we got some issues? We got overarching thoughts about the housing recommendations. Going once?
Yeah.
Going twice? So,
Good job.
all right. I will just need you to be official and read the next
sorry.
agenda item. Sorry. I know this is,
I'm gonna get fired. Okay.
No, you won't.
This is a job nobody else wants. Okay, moving on to item 3, discussion on draft transportation recommendations for the Stevens Point Aging Plan.
all right. So similar to the last one, these policy recommendations are broken up into 3 different areas. First being education, second being infrastructure, and third being programming. So the first one for education is to partner with City Transit and other local organizations to create a trip planning and training opportunities that are geared for older adults. Caitlin, I'm sure, can expand more. I mean, this was some back and forth conversation that you and I and Kate had on that. So that's the first one. Second one is to increase access and marketing opportunities to driver education programs for older adults. This was a big takeaway that I've gleaned over the last few months is the interest and interest of our older residents and the interest of our older residents to get a refresher at the very least of the rules of the road. What are some of the driver laws because of various reasons, some uncomfortability, if that's a word, late in the day, that folks may have. So really just increasing the awareness and the opportunities for folks that if they do want to take a driver education class, that those resources do exist.
And I will say that AARP offers driver safety.
Yes.
But right now, there is no one in central Wisconsin who is trained to be an AARP driver safety instructor. So there's an opportunity there for.
Do you know what the process is to become certified?
It's on the AARP website. I don't know it exactly, but I don't think it's terribly complicated. So we had our teacher retire, and then we had one come in, and she didn't like to drive in the snow, so I could only schedule her like certain times. And then she stopped doing it, so we have kind of got a dearth of that right now. So anybody knows anyone who really likes being a driving instructor? That would help us meet this goal, so.
I mean, not driving in the snow is the most safe option.
She's being as safe as possible.
Especially on Sunday.
But it's actually on, some seniors are getting letters from their insurance companies asking them to take driver safety classes.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Now, you can take them online, but obviously that presents a whole other barrier. So having the in-person classes were great. They were ARPS for like a $20 donation for people to take the class. And so it's out there. It's just right now we have a little bit of a hole. I just want to put that on record. Okay.
Awesome. And then the last one is to pursue the adoption of an ADA transition plan by 2035. This was one where I intentionally went a little bit more specific because this is kind of my pet peeve in that, to be blunt, we as a city government, we're required based off of the number of employees we have to have an ADA transition plan, which is essentially a deep dive of every single municipal building that we have. Kind of does an audit of the accessibility of said building and comes up with recommendations to help make it be more ADA compliant. Like I said, we're required by the Americans with Disabilities Act to have an ADA transition plan. A number of communities here in the state have done so to various degrees of specificity. Some are pretty short, say 20 pages. Some goes in the range of several hundred pages. So there's flexibility in how dense this ADA transition plan will be, but it's a long time coming, and I think that's something that we need to really prioritize going forward. So take a pause again. Any comments, questions, or concerns? Akira.
I just wondered if maybe somewhere within there would also be like bicycle safety. I just think about, and I don't know that a lot of seniors are like just picking up a bike, but as a person that like I didn't ride a bike for like 20 years and I just got a bike last year, and it's the first time I ever drove a bike in a bike lane. I mean, like there are just things that they might not have had to deal with earlier in life.
It's
So.
worse than that, they're getting e-bikes and scooters.
Yeah.
They can do 30 miles an hour without knowing how to do it.
Right.
Yeah, so I guess knowing like what the safety is around that and laws around that too, and
Yeah.
And I think that might fit in the last bullet point for programming, the obtaining membership with the Wisconsin Bike Fed.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, they have great safety classes.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, it's based off of what tier of membership you want in terms of how much extras we want, right? Like how much, in-person educational programming do we want? I think even the cheaper quote-unquote models at the very least has flyers and certain materials that we can distribute. But so I'm thinking that might, your comment there, Bakira, might relate more to that last one. It's kind of a mix between both the programming and obviously the education piece to it. Awesome. All right. Next section, then focusing on infrastructure. So again, more hardscape sort of improvements. So first one being to identify funding and operational barriers to expand community-based transportation services. This is really focusing more on city transit. What are gaps in our network and what are ways that we could try to close that gap? Obviously, there's a lot of factors involved, some outside of our control, but at least having that overarching and repetitive conversation would be key. Second, sort of similarly, but this is focusing more on pedestrian network, is to prioritize closing gaps in the pedestrian network through the city's high injury network streets. So high injury network streets are pretty self-explanatory. Our corridors that have a higher likelihood for injuries and fatalities, to try to, particularly those involving pedestrians, so trying to close certain barriers. So if there's a certain segment of street that does not have a sidewalk and that's included as part of the city's high injury network, I think that would be a reasonable area to prioritize the installation of sidewalk in the future. Third one would be to partner with the city's Bicycle and Pedestrian Street Safety Commission to implement policy recommendations through the Portage County Countywide Bike Ped Plan, the update, as Sarah and Katie are aware. I had to pull that plug.
Yeah.
It's like,
I'm like, it should be in here.
yes, you have to, with all this effort that we're doing.
Yep.
Fourth one, prioritize locations to install audible pedestrian signals. This is something that we've been starting as a community within the last couple of years. I think the first one being intersection of Division, Wisconsin, Jefferson. I believe that was the first one, some 2 years ago maybe. But I've personally, at least through my capacity with our City Bike Ped Street Safety Commission, that's been met with pretty glowing remarks, glowing views of those audible pedestrian signals. So I think the next step is the next reasonable step is to prioritize where future installation should be when funding is available. And the last one is to specifically for multifamily and non-residential land uses require in the city zoning code that an accessible path shall be constructed between the parking lot, main entrances, between the parking lot and entrances into the primary building. Forgot the word and. Basically what this is saying is that, this is kind of partially interwoven with the Americans with Disabilities Act, is that if you're constructing a parking lot for a new building, you have to identify what the accessible route is from parking lot to main entrances into the building, and that accessible route essentially has to be the shortest path of travel from parking lot, specifically those ADAs, those accessible parking stalls, to that of the primary entrance. So this is really adding some more teeth to that, because we don't have that right now in our zoning code, to add some more teeth to say, you have to have this accessible path, and maybe I had to look a little bit more deeply in how other communities structure it, but add some more teeth in terms of the minimum and maximum distances between parking stalls and main entrances, the lighting of those accessible paths. So really just honing in on the regulatory nature of requiring accessible paths. So again, stop right here, and any clarifying questions or comments? Cool beans. Then the last one is programming. First one is to collaborate with neighborhood associations in creating a sidewalk assistance volunteer program. This is intentionally vague in terms of, this is going to be more based off of what neighborhood associations want to see as part of a sidewalk assistance program. Is it merely just, say, clearing of snow on sidewalks, or is it more than that? Is it ways to report if there is significant cracks or chips in a sidewalk? Ways where you can advocate for new sidewalks in areas where sidewalk does not exist, advocating for, again, lighting, for example, of sidewalks where there is not any lighting, just to improve that sense of safety. So I intentionally have left this a little vague based off of how each individual neighborhood would want to structure that program. But really the concept here is let the neighborhoods lead with this type of program and let those residents in said neighborhood facilitate what they want to see for sidewalk connectivity and their overall comfortability of walking within our sidewalk network. And then the last one, already touched on that, obtain membership with the Wisconsin Bike Fed. I guess the last thing I'll say, just to put a bow on the transportation one, I purposely didn't talk a lot about bicycling as a mode of transportation, because that was a comment I heard over and over again was, primary modes of transportation for older residents are driving, public transit, and then walking. Biking was lower on the totem pole of priority and even interest in utilizing those modes of transportation if they have the resources available. So there's a reason. That's a big reason why I didn't touch on bicycling as heavy as what I did with walking. So, yes. Oh, John.
Well, it's kind of seasonal, but I don't know how you would phrase it, but I think in the future, the Plover River crossing, there's about 1,500 to 2,000 people on the far east side. I can show you a way now, next fall, how to never go out on 10 and 66.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if there's some kind of phrasing that could be included as we develop subdivisions in the future to at least think about, I'm not going to get on my bike, in December, but I am going to do it 6 months out of the year probably, especially the bikes that are coming in the future, the three-wheelers, the electric, and even carts, that when I go to Florida, everybody's in a golf cart, which is insane. But it's not when there is infrastructure for that. So nobody is burning gas there. But I think that's in the future, but I think it wouldn't hurt to have some kind of phrasing in there for future subdivisions to at least consider wayfinding.
I think it's a great idea. Winona, Minnesota has something like that, where you can even get from Wisconsin, if you live on that side, to work in Winona.
Appreciate it.
The new subdivision out on the east side has a trail. It only leads to roads at this point in time, but it is obvious how you would get from here to here, and I can get you downtown without ever going out on a main street. So I think more seniors would maybe utilize that kind of transportation if they're able, if they didn't risk their life.
I would utilize it more.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually been something, I'll probably touch on this a little bit for the staff update, but not only as part of rewriting the zoning code, I'm also would be looking to rewrite the city subdivision ordinance and our sign code as well. And one of the things that I know I want to address through our subdivision ordinance is being more explicit in when we would require sidewalks, when we would require bike lanes, when we would require multi-use paths. And the reason I had this thought is, especially our more recent projects, the convent being a good example, we've kind of shifted from installing sidewalks to installing multi-use paths. What's the reason for that? There really isn't a descriptive reason that says for this given type of development, for this given situation, we should prioritize a multi-use path versus a sidewalk. And I think that's the heart of the conversation that's the heart of the discussion that I want to include as part of rewriting the subdivision ordinance, is being more explicit in what situations warrant that. And I think for sure, as part of that, I love the idea of improving wayfinding of bike routes, sidewalk network as well, so.
And on the multi-use path versus sidewalk, I want to share, just personally, I have a physical disability which interferes with my ability to walk well. And sidewalks have all these ramps for cars. So if you're walking down the sidewalk, it's flat sidewalk, ramp, flat sidewalk, so you're kind of like this. And it really is a multi-use path. If I have that choice, I always take it because I know that is going to be a flat surface. I also feel safer because there aren't going to be cars zipping out of parking lots. So I'm glad to hear that.
Perfect.
Okay.
Any other thoughts or comments? Kind of big picture for transportation, anything that's missing or anything that, hey, hold up, we got some major issues with what's on the page or what's on the screen in the packet.
Just one last comment. I know I'm focused on trails a lot, but all new subdivisions have to have a percentage for recreation, and a trail can be used. You don't need a swing and a sliding board. Trails can be used, and so it could be a silver bullet.
Yeah, requiring either the dedication of parkland or payment in lieu of creating a park.
Right.
So,
Right.
perfect. Okay, I think we
Okay.
should be, I guess maybe before, sorry. So, in terms of next steps, next time when we meet, I'm hoping it will be either the latter part of April or early May. I'm going to try to get into a little bit more repetitive cycle for these next couple months. What my goal is next time we meet, I'm going to present the second draft of the housing and transportation sections. This will include a narrative, more of a narrative of each of these policy recommendations to try to fine tune this. And then I'll also introduce probably just one additional planning area. So this one would be the outdoor spaces and buildings. So and we'll continue going through that process over the next few months.
Okay. Moving on to staff updates.
Yes. So this, keep it short and sweet, more so because we'll be talking about this more at a future meeting. I included the full memorandum and supplemental information that was sent over to our Plan Commission in February about the authorization to rewrite the city zoning code. I encourage you to look at it if you haven't done so, what's included in the packet. I wanted to let you folks know, one, we're doing this, and two, the work that we as a commission are doing, specifically writing this aging plan, it's going to be well connected to what this new zoning code will be. And so what my goal is not only for this commission, but for a couple other commissions that are going to have a direct stake with what this 21st century zoning code will be, is we'll have a more thorough conversation about zoning, what it is, how is it applied, and what are some of the, what are some overarching recommendations that each given commission wants to see as part of a zoning code rewrite. So expect sometime when we have a shorter agenda in the next couple of months, I'll include items where we could speak in length about zoning code rewrite. So, otherwise, that's all.
Okay. Would anyone like to move to adjourn? I move to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thanks, guys.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.